Today we're going to be looking at a task called comparing test scores, and this is going to give us a chance to actually compare some data, especially in a box and whisker plot. So as we're taking a look, there's a classroom for Mrs. Sanchez, and she is comparing the data of the students on the right side of the classroom to the left side of the classroom on a test worth 100 points. Now the students on the right scored this set of data right here, and if you calculate the mean of this data, there's a total of 12 students, you find that the mean is actually 75. And if you calculate the mean of the scores here, for the left side, the mean is a 77 and a half. So currently, looking at these two pieces of data, we immediately would make an assumption or predict that the students on the left side had higher achievement or did better on this test. So now let's dig into looking at the actual two box plots. That's another name that it's used. And let's do some comparisons. So first, as we're taking a look at these two boxes, notice the shapes. As far as looking at the boxes themselves, it looks like this part right here, remember that is 1/4 of the data because it's split into 1/4 or 25%. Looks like that one's a little bit smaller, but there's not a major difference. The box part here is a little bit larger of an area, but this one has a very large range. It has a range of 100, and this one has a much smaller range of 35. Okay, we often refer to this one as having like a lower variance, and variance is talking about that spread. Are we talking about a small area here from this point to this point, or is it a real wide area? And notice this one is really, really wide, which means it has a much larger spread from the beginning to the end. So this one has a lower variance. And a lower variance typically means that your data is much closer together and it's more consistent. Whereas when you have the wide, it's not. Since it's spread out further apart, then it will not be as consistent in the measures being close together. So that's one way of looking at just checking out those two shapes. The next thing I want us to do is let's look at that median on these. Now, they are actually lined up, so if I go straight down, and that's not the straightest of line, notice that 50% right here, 50% of this group scored 90 to 95. I mean 90 to 100. That was from a 90. So 50%. That's a very large number. But if you look down here, if this whole part right here, that means less than 25% scored. So less than 25% scored from an 87. See, we're going to keep our data, we can estimate, but we need to keep it as accurate because we're going to be making these statistical arguments in just a second as to which one was more successful. So statistically, we can't say about. But looking at this, we can definitely say that less than 20 or 25% scored 87.5 to 95. So definitely a smaller number scored in that higher range in comparison. Another thing that we can look at is if this is right here 25% and 25% and 25%, and then you've got a large range here of 25%. Now notice this 25% scored below a 75. Now if we come up down here though, notice that my low extreme here was at 0, whereas the lowest score here was a 60. There is a very big difference in data when it's starting at a 60. For my extreme low, is at 60. And this one is at 0. Very large difference. Here we have our upper extreme, which is 100. There we go. And on this one, our upper extreme is a 95. Not a large difference in that information right there, but still some significant information. So on this, as we look at our data and do some comparisons, we've talked a little bit about the range. Let's also talk about and we've talked about the median. The median is 90 here, and the median here was 80. That's a pretty significant difference to say that the middle grade was an 80 versus a 90. Think about which one you would prefer to have. All right, we also want to look at that interquartile range. So notice right here that IQR is 22.5. And the IQR here is 20. There's not a huge difference in those two pieces, but it's something we definitely want to look at when we're making some comparisons between the data. Okay, so looking at some of these different pieces of data here and just kind of doing some comparisons, we see that if we wanted to make a statistical argument that the students on the right-hand side were more successful, one thing that we could say is 50% scored 90 to 100. Another fact or statistical piece of data is that you had the upper extreme was at 100, which is another strong piece of data. If we go from right here all the way across, we have 75% of students scoring a 75 or better. So 75 to 100. Okay, so that's some really key information. For us to look at. Now, if we move on to another part about this, let's look at the statistical argument for the left-hand side. Well, one thing that's great is that the low score was a 60. It had a smaller spread. That's your IQR also. I'm sorry, it had the greater spread. My mind just went blank. So your IQR spread was higher. It had a lower variance. That was 22.5. Lower variance. and our range was just 35, so that means it was more consistent. Okay, those are 3 key things. Oh, there's one more. And notice back to our data here. It had a mean of 77.5. So looking at your data, when you see and do the comparisons here, would you be able to make a prediction as to which one is better, who you think scored better? And I also want to add, looking at these 75%. So once again, noticing that at least 75% scored probably a passing grade, since usually a 70 is passing. Whereas here, we do not have 75%, less than 75% scored a passing score. So, which one do you think is a better comparison?